I was working the night shift at a hotel when it happened. I'd been there a few years, so I was used to weird guests, awkward moments, the usual creeps passing through. But this one guy, he still sticks with me. It was around 2 a.m. when he walked into the lobby. The first thing I noticed was the smell, awful, like burning plastic or chemicals. But I figured he was one of the contractors in town for the nearby chemical plant. We got a lot of those. I didn't think much of it. He booked a room, didn't say much, and went upstairs. The night passed like usual. My shift ended. I went home. Next night I come in and hear from housekeeping. His room's empty, but his stuff is still there. He hadn't paid for another night, and no one had seen him since he checked in. So his things were moved to the storage room, like we always do. About an hour into my shift, I get a call. It's the police. They ask about the man who stayed in room 208. I say yeah, he checked in, left his stuff, and disappeared. Then they tell me he's a wanted fugitive. Apparently just 2 hours before checking into the hotel, he beat his wife nearly to death. That's when it hit me. The smell, his silence, the way he looked. He wasn't just another tired worker. He was running, hiding. The officer gave me the usual warning. Don't engage, call immediately if he comes back. Said he's violent, unpredictable. My stomach dropped. I was trying to act normal, but inside I was panicking. And then, of course, he came back. Not even 30 minutes later, he walked through the front door again, asking for his luggage. I kept my voice steady and my face neutral. Inside, I was shaking. I told him I wasn't sure where his things were, that I'd have to check a few storage units upstairs. I asked him to wait in the lobby. He didn't say anything, just stared at me. I turned and started walking toward the stairs, trying to keep my steps calm and slow. But halfway up, I heard footsteps behind me. He was following. My throat tightened. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stop. I couldn't panic. So I kept walking, pretending I didn't notice. I reached the storage floor and opened the first closet I saw, pretending to search through it. Then another, and another, all while he stood just behind me, silent. After a few minutes, his tone changed. He started getting impatient, angry. Where's my underscore? I need it now. I need to go. Then his fist went straight through the wall. No warning, just snapped. I jumped back, heart racing. There was enough space between us now, so I bolted. I ran straight down the hall, fumbling with my master key, and locked myself inside an empty guest room. He banged on the door a couple of times, then disappeared. I stayed in that room, phone in hand, calling the police. They showed up 20 minutes later. He was gone again, vanished just like before. The officers searched the area, but nothing. They checked the bags he left behind. Inside they found meth syringes and all kinds of drug paraphernalia. That explained the smell. That explained everything, really. I sat at the front desk the rest of the night, wired with adrenaline. I couldn't stop thinking about how fast it all happened, how close it got. I didn't feel safe there anymore. I quit not long after that night. I kept trying to push it out of my mind, telling myself it was over, that he was gone, but it didn't help. Every time the front door opened during my shift, I flinched. I kept thinking he'd come back again. I didn't feel safe in that place anymore. I didn't trust that someone violent like that could walk right in without anyone stopping him. And I couldn't forget how close I came to something worse. He followed me. He put a hole in the wall. He could have done more. He didn't, but he could have. No one ever told me if they caught him. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. No one followed up. His face still sits in my head sometimes, especially when I see someone walk into a room quiet and tense like he did. That same dead stare, that same silence. It's strange how something can feel normal 1 second, then shift in an instant. You think you're in control, and then suddenly you're just trying to get out of a hallway without being attacked. I still work in hospitality, but not night shifts, not in places where I'm the only one around. That job taught me more than I wanted to know about who can walk through a door and how fast things can go wrong. I wish I could say I handled it better. I wish I could say I didn't panic. But I did. I just got lucky that I had space to run. Sometimes that's all you need. A few steps ahead, a locked door, enough time to breathe and get help. And sometimes that's all you get. It was the summer of 2008. I was 7 years old, and finally tall enough to ride the one ride I'd been begging to try at the county fair. My cousin Jared, who was a couple years older than me, came with me. My mom let us go off on our own for a bit. It felt like a big deal. Freedom. After the ride, Jared needed to use the bathroom. There were only porta potties at the fairgrounds, so I waited just outside for him. That's when a man walked up to me. He looked normal, not scary, not suspicious, just an average guy. He smiled and said I was supposed to go with him. I asked him why. He said my parents told him to come get me. At 7, that kind of lie worked. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just stood there confused. He didn't even say my mom's name, just your parents. But I still believed him. He started walking and I followed. He didn't grab me right away. Just kept saying we were going to get some food. McDonald's, he said. I told him I wasn't hungry. He kept walking toward the parking area. It was a long walk from the fairgrounds to the lot. 5 or 10 minutes, maybe more. I asked again where we were going. He said my parents were meeting us. I didn't know what to do. I felt like something was wrong, but I couldn't move. Then he grabbed my arm. We were near his truck by now. He was trying to get me into the back seat. I still couldn't scream properly, just this weak whisper. I was crying, but I couldn't get my voice to work. Then, out of nowhere, a young couple ran up. The woman grabbed me and started shouting. The man came too, but the guy was already in his truck, speeding off. He ran over the man's foot as he drove away. Before we move on, here is a quick question. What would you have done if a stranger tried to lead your kid away like that? Calm talk. No struggle, just a lie. Tell me in the comments. Best comment gets pinned. The couple walked me back toward the fair entrance. I was still shaking. I didn't know how to explain what had just happened. I could barely speak. The man limped a bit, but he kept one hand on my shoulder the whole time, like he didn't want to risk that guy coming back. When we reached the entrance, he found a security person and told them there was a missing child who had been found. He didn't go into detail at first, just asked them to make an announcement. My mom and Jared showed up within minutes. She looked terrified. Jared looked confused. As soon as I saw her, I broke down and ran into her arms. I remember crying hard, telling her, "Why did you send that man to take me?" That's how deep the lie had sunk in. I thought she had actually sent him. She held me tight and said she didn't know who that man was. She kept saying, "You're safe now. You're okay." We left the fair right after that. My mom didn't ask too many questions in that moment. I think she was just trying to hold herself together. She didn't want to scare me more than I already was. But I could tell something had changed in her. She didn't take her eyes off me for the rest of the night. That was the last time we went to the fair that year. In fact, we didn't go back the next year either. My mom got paranoid. Thought that guy might still be out there, watching, waiting for another chance. She wasn't wrong to think that way. I didn't feel safe either. I didn't want to go back. I stopped thinking about it for a while. Life went on, school started, normal days returned. But the feeling stuck with me. The memory of that arm on mine, the silence in my throat, the truck door opened behind me. Years passed and I didn't talk about that day much. It faded into the background like a lot of childhood memories do. But every once in a while it came back. Usually when I was in a crowded place or saw a kid wandering too far from their parents. I think what stayed with me most wasn't the fear. It was the confusion, how easy it was for someone to fool me with just a few words. No force, no threats, just calm lies and a friendly tone. That's all it took for me to follow a man I'd never seen before toward a car I was never supposed to be in. I've thought a lot about how close that was. If that couple hadn't seen us, if they hadn't acted fast, what then? I don't know what that man wanted, but I know it wasn't McDonald's. I never saw him again. No one ever tracked him down. No police report, no follow-up, It all ended in a blur, and then life just moved on, but it changed something in me. After that, I didn't trust strangers. I stayed close to my mom in public. I watched people differently. Even now, as an adult, I still get flashes of that moment. His hand grabbing my arm, his truck door opening, the way my body just froze. I still remember the woman's voice shouting as she pulled me away. I still remember the look on that man's face as he sped off. A few years ago, my girlfriend asked me to go to a fair. We were walking through and she wanted to ride something. I realized it was the same one Jared and I rode that day. Same spot, same setup. I agreed, but I couldn't stop looking around the whole time. I guess some things don't leave you, they just get quieter. It was the summer of 2012. I was 11 and spending the night at my best friend Anna's house. She lived out in the woods, no neighbors close by, just trees stretching forever. We loved it. That backyard felt like a playground. We barely stayed indoors. Most days we were either in the woods or on the old trampoline way out in a clearing behind the house. That night we decided to go jump on the trampoline before bed. It was old rusty springs, no safety net. I didn't like that part. Always had this fear I'd bounce too high and fly off. Still, we went. Shoes off, jumping in the dark, laughing like we always did. But something shifted. I don't know how to explain it. The air felt heavier. The woods looked darker, even though nothing had changed. I stopped jumping, just stood still, staring out toward the trees. Anna froze too. "There's a person," she whispered. I followed her gaze. At first I didn't see anything, then I did. A man, tall, shadowed, standing between the trees. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching us. Then he shifted slightly, trying to hide behind a thick tree trunk, but not well. We could still see him. We didn't move. We didn't scream. We didn't even breathe. Just stared. Then I noticed something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was, but he was gripping it tight. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some random person walking by. He was there for a reason. Before we move on, here is a quick question. If you were two kids on a trampoline in the middle of the woods and saw a man watching you, what would you do? Let me know in the comments. Best reply gets pinned. Anna pushed me hard. "Run," she said. Her voice snapped me out of it. I jumped off the trampoline without thinking, hit the ground hard and started running toward the house. My feet barely touched the dirt. I looked back once. He was moving. Fast. He was running after us. That was all it took. Panic kicked in. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life, and we sprinted through the dark path, stumbling, crashing through low branches and brush. Every second felt like he was gaining on us, like he'd reach out and grab one of us at any moment. We didn't stop until we hit the back porch. We threw the door open and slammed it behind us, out of breath, eyes wide, shaking. Her mom was in the kitchen. We tried to speak, but couldn't get the words out right. Just pointed toward the woods, gasping. She stepped outside immediately, grabbed a flashlight, and shouted into the trees, threatening whoever was out there. But by then it was just darkness again. No sound, no footsteps, nothing. Like he had melted back into the woods. She called the police, but nothing came of it. No one was found, no sign of anyone. Just our word, two kids' fear, and one flashlight beam cutting through empty space. That night, neither of us slept. We stayed on the living room floor, wrapped in blankets, eyes glued to the windows. The next day, we tried to talk about it like it was a weird story. Tried to laugh a little, make it feel smaller. But it didn't feel small, it felt too real, too close. The man didn't take anything. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Just being there, standing in the dark, holding something in his hand, that was enough. After that night, we never went near the woods in the dark again. The trampoline sat unused for weeks. It was too far from the house, too exposed. Every time I looked out toward that clearing, I saw him again, just standing there in my head, half hidden, watching. Anna's mom didn't bring it up much after that. She didn't want to scare us more, but she did start locking up the house tighter. Lights stayed on longer at night. We weren't allowed outside after dark, unless an adult was nearby. The weirdest part was how fast it happened. One minute we were jumping and laughing like nothing in the world could touch us. The next, we were running for our lives. That switch, that split second where everything turns, is what stayed with me. Sometimes I think about how easily it could have gone differently. What if we hadn't seen him right away? What if we froze longer before running? What if he'd gotten to the trampoline faster? We never found out who he was. No reports, no arrests, no explanation. Just a moment burned into our memory. 2 kids in the dark, a man in the trees, and a silent chase through the woods. Even now, I don't like being outside alone at night. It's not the dark that bothers me. It's the idea that someone might be standing just beyond what I can see. Quiet, waiting, just like that night. I still see Anna sometimes. We don't talk about it anymore. But every now and then, when there's a long pause in conversation or the wind moves through the trees a certain way, I can tell she's thinking about it too. Some stories don't have clear endings. They just stay with you quiet and unfinished.